Welcome, everyone, to the March Online Meetup. My name is Adrian Goins. Today, we are going to talk about the container development workflow, building images within your Kubernetes, which is actually really exciting. We have some new technology that we're going to show. I mean, we're always showing you new technology. That's the whole purpose of these meetups, and today is no different. I am joined today by Jacob Blaine Kristen and Hussein Galal. Jacob will be doing the demo and Hussein will be helping answer the Q&A section. But guys, why don't you take a moment and say hello and introduce yourself. Jacob, you go first.
Hi, as Adrian said, Jacob Blaine Kristen, working in the RKE2 and K3S space at Rancher for about 18 months now.
Hey everyone,
Hussein?
I'm Hussein Galal. I'm a senior software engineer in Rancher, and I'm working on the K3S and RK2 space as well. And I've been in Rancher now in Susan for like 4 years now. So yeah.
Did you say 40 years?
4.5 years, yeah.
40 years. That's crazy. Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm super excited to have both of you here with me today. And for those of you who are joining us, my name is Adrian Goins. I'm the Director of Community here at SUSE. Now, before we hand over the webinar to the smart people who will tell you the coolness, there's some housekeeping stuff. First of all, this is a meetup. It's not a webinar. Did I just say webinar? It's not a webinar. It's a meetup. And if you've ever been to a Rancher meetup, you understand that there are some basic rules. One is we're not going to finish on time. We want you to ask lots of questions. And in fact, if you go to the GoToWebinar, whatever that thing is, it took over the corner of your screen, and there's a questions panel there. When you think of a question, ask it. Hussein and I will be answering questions throughout the demonstration, and then we'll flag some of those to have Jacob answer live. So ask questions. There are no bad questions. The only thing that I ask of you is that you keep your questions on topic related to what you're seeing today. If you're asking questions about how to troubleshoot your Rancher environment or something that's not related to stuff, we're probably just going to direct you to other resources, which I'll show you in just a moment. Rancher meetups are all about doing demos. We demo some more, and sometimes demos don't go so well, but that's just part of life. So if it breaks, that's cool. It just switches to live debugging. We will get back on track and we will continue to show you whatever cool technology we brought you here for today. These are the aforementioned resources. Rancher has tremendous community support. So you can join the Slack community. If you don't have an invitation for that, you can go to slack.rancher.io. And we also have forums, which I don't think I have a slide for here. So those are at forums.rancher.com. Those two places are where you can get real-time support from other members of the community. Rancher engineers and myself are also there and helping out. And if you have any questions about what you see today or anything in general, that's the place to go. Intro, that's the part I'm doing right now. Then we are going to introduce you to a new piece of technology called the Kubernetes Image Manager. Jacob will give you a rundown of what that is, and then we'll go through a demonstration. And even though we do Q&A at the end, like I said, ask the questions when you think of them, and if there's places in the demo where Jacob can pause, we might try to throw some questions at him and see if he can show us some stuff live. We often get people, especially now that we're all post-acquisition and stuff, who may not be aware of just how much Rancher does. Rancher is more than just the Kubernetes management platform that most of you are familiar with. Rancher also has, it shows 2 Kubernetes distributions here. There's actually a third one called RKE2. We have a storage solution called Longhorn. We have a hosted Rancher service. We have a GitOps solution called Fleet. We have a whole bunch of open source projects, Harvester, Submariner, and there's not enough space on the slide to list all of the things that we're involved in. Our objective is to make rock solid, awesome tools for you to use to build, deploy, manage, interact with, develop against anything in the Kubernetes ecosystem. And all of that stuff is free and open source for you. From an ongoing learning perspective, if you would like to learn more about Rancher and our technologies, we have a host of resources. There's the Rancher YouTube channel. There's my own YouTube channel where I post content about Rancher stuff and related technologies. We do masterclasses that then go up on the Rancher YouTube channel. We have my bi-weekly Intro to Kubernetes and Rancher training. We have the Rancher Academy, in fact, where you can go and you can take a 5-week-long intensive course on how to build RKE clusters, install Rancher into them, and then use Rancher to deploy and manage Kubernetes. That also is totally free. our gift to you for being a member of the community. So if you're interested in that, you can go to academy.rancher.com. If you're interested in the YouTube stuff, it's just youtube.com/c/rancher. And I mean, come on, it's Rancher, it's YouTube. I'm sure y'all can find it. And with that, that ends my intro spiel. So I will hand this off to Jacob, who's going to take us on a whirlwind tour of Kim. Are you ready, sir?
Yeah, ready to go. So I threw these slides together to talk about, why I started working on Kim. Some of you may be coming to this with some history, knowing that Kim sort of is an outgrowth of the work that we did with K3C. And K3C was something that Darren started as a way of saying, what if Docker but we used container DCRI as the actual container runtime, and used it to its fullest, and did all of the Docker things, but with the CRI on the back end. And also let's throw in build kit so we can do build and all that good stuff. And that was an interesting project, and we got something working, but it was essentially a maintenance nightmare because we were rebuilding containerd and shipping it along with build kit as a plugin. It was a couple layers of hacks that was just going to be tough to maintain. And so we said, okay, let's take a step back and let's get back to what we really want to be doing, which is speeding up the image development sort of iteration cycle. And so then that gets us to, I'll talk more about sort of how we're pulling that off in the next slide, but that gets us to container images, right? Like if you are deeply familiar with the sort of the container space, you know that, Docker got here and pioneered how to build images and whatnot, but you should also know that, technically to run a container, you don't actually need an image. And sort of if you're familiar with the OCI spec and whatnot, and run C and those things, you know that you just need the content in place, and then a descriptor that says here's what my container is, and then to run it. But Kubernetes has decided to go all in on images, and in fact you can't do anything useful without an image, right? And so and the reason for that is because when you define an image, you take that content and you've made it portable. You've made it easy to move around to other nodes. And so that's great and all. I want to run things in Kubernetes. How do I build an image? Well, first you got to go download and install Docker, or maybe it's Podman and Builda, or maybe it's any other number of tools that build images. But then let's just take Docker as an example, or even Podman, which is a Docker work-like. You're going to have to learn or know ahead of time all the parts of it to ignore just to be able to build an image. And so what Kim attempts to address is strictly image management, but first and foremost building images in a Kubernetes native world, and initially focusing on K3s. All right, so I mentioned, we're focused on really shortening that feedback loop for developing images, right? Because if you're familiar with the Docker path, it's, okay, I'm working on this service, I've got to now Docker build an image, and then I push it, and then I, update my deployment descriptor, update my my deployment manifest in my cluster, and push it out, apply it, run it, whatever. And that can be a bit slow. It'd be nice to just say, okay, I've built the thing, I'm just going to restart, and I'd like for that new image to get picked up. And with Kim, because it builds directly on the containerd that your kubelet is running against, that is very much the case. The image is immediately available based on the tag that you gave it. And so if you use the same tag, it will replace the images that was already there, right? And the whole idea here is, to rephrase it in a different way, is to enable an image-centric development workflow local to your K3s installation, right? And of course, I wanted to get a little bit nerdy, so local is kind of a determinant based on your network topology and tomography, right? And the reason that I mentioned that is because it's a call out to the fact that you may be running kubectl from a Mac client against a Docker cluster in a VM or remotely. And if you're familiar with the way Docker for desktop works, that's actually what you're doing when you're running it on Windows or a Mac, right? You're running Docker in a VM on your Mac, and your Docker client running on your Mac natively is talking to that via some socket magic. So that's kind of why I wanted to call that out. And honestly, that's similar. That's a similar sort of setup that we want to assume that people are familiar with doing that, with AKA running a client like kubectl or Kim, and it's a native client to your host system, operating system and architecture, but it can talk to the back end, whatever, as long as it's running Kubernetes. And all right, so before I get into how that's made to work, right? We wanted to have a CLI in UX that is very familiar. So you'll see that, and I can demo all of these, right? Like these commands should look very, very familiar, except, it's just got Kim replacing Docker. And for the most part, there should be, for all these commands, there should be like a one-to-one correspondence with flags. There's a little bit of extra and a couple of things that I'll show you. But for the most part, the commands that you expect to work should work. And oh, by the way, we also have implemented Kim as a kubectl drop-in. If you symlink to Kim or rename it as kubectl-image, then you can run kubectl image, and you can do build and tag and push and pull and RMI and all that good stuff. And you get now the same familiar CLI UX, but with kubectl, and it feels more sort of native to that experience. I know some folks may be very familiar with CRI CTL, but it's always different than kubectl, and I don't like to switch my modes. Like, I know Docker really well, I know kubectl well enough. I don't want to have to keep a long stack of tools in my toolbox and in my head if I don't have to. And so that's kind of why we did that. Any questions at this point? Anything coming up, Adrian, Hussein? Also, if I'm talking too fast, please let me know.
No, I think you're talking fine. Nobody said you're talking too fast yet. There's a question from Bill where he said, "Is there any special privileges required, or like a connection to a host socket?"
Any special privileges required? Yeah. So building, the way we do the building, I'll talk about that kind of in the next slide. But the way
Yeah, I think we might have lost Jacob. Oh,
yeah,
Jacob,
hello?
you're back. We lost you there for about 15 seconds. Right when you switched to this slide, you disappeared. Can you repeat what
Interesting.
you said?
Yeah, I'll repeat all that I said. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's not your fault. It's the internet, man. Come on.
So, are there any special privileges? I was going to speak to that as part of the architecture, but the simple answer is yes. When we set up the builder is a very privileged process. It has hostnet, PID, IPC, and it's privileged, and it's got some bind mounts because it wants to bind directly to your containerd socket. And it also needs to maintain essentially the exact same file system that's important to containerd is important to the Kim agent running on the back end, right? So it definitely binds itself tightly in a very privileged way to your CRI, to your containerd on the back end, as well as, and part of that is also because BuildKit needs privileges when it's talking directly to your containerd. And one other thing that I forgot to mention is it also needs to bind mount in the same C group FS root, right, that containerd is using. BuildKit needs that as well for things to work correctly. So that was a long answer. The short answer is yes, the builder is very privileged. And so one of the things that we do is when we install Kim on a node, we mark it as a builder.
We lost you again. We lost you again.
Okay.
Yeah.
After what part?
Yeah.
I apologize.
Roll back about 10 seconds again. It's okay. It's okay.
Roll back about 10 seconds again. Well, so long and the short of it is, Kim is a very privileged installation. And one of the things that it does upon installation is it marks the node that it's installed upon as a builder with a role. So you can see that in the node output. And so there's all kinds of implications for that. But the long and the short of it is, yes, a very privileged installation because it's binding to your containerd.
Yep.
All right.
that works.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so Bill actually had a follow-up to that, asking how is it better than just using a privileged Docker build agent?
Well, because you've still got to ship your images from that Docker runtime to your containerd CRI runtime, right? Like even though Docker, even though your Docker and your kubelet can be talking to the same containerd, Docker does not use containerd for content management, whereas the kubelet does. So you still need to ship it some way or another. Maybe you do a Docker save, and then you export it into a tarball, and then immediately pipe that into a CTR load. Kim gets rid of that middle step and makes the image. Basically, it saves the image to the containerd content store, and it's immediately available without any other translation.
Yeah, that's hugely valuable. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
All right, so let me move a little bit forward, right? So we mentioned the familiar CLI, and I wanted to basically talk about at a high level, like here are all the parts, right? There's the CLI, there's potentially an external registry, but as we said, you don't actually need that per se with local development, but there obviously comes a time where you need to ship what you've built, and the external registry connectivity is there, aka push and pull, and you can also even tell BuildKit because as is shown here, part of the K3S, the Kim builder installation is BuildKit, as well as a Kim agent that sort of sits on top of BuildKit and containerd. And one of the primary functions of that Kim agent, which gets back to the previous question of image content being local and immediately available, the Kim agent listens for BuildKit images that show up in the BuildKit containerd namespace. Totally different from the concept of Kubernetes namespaces, by the way. It listens for images that get updated or created there, and immediately copies that content and sets up the same links in the Kates.io namespace, which is the namespace that the kubelet leverages, right? And so that's, well, and it also then sits in front of the CRI or containerd, and does the Docker-like things that you would expect, right? Like it allows you to, one of the other things that the Kim agent does is it is a true remote for the CRI backend. That way a client can talk to it, and it establishes all of the expectations of a remote connection, as opposed to talking to a containerd on remote, which you can do, but the containerd client code assumes basically co-location with your server, which sort of breaks the model that we want to run with here, which is there may be a complete network separation between your host and your client. Hope that was clear. Was that a little bit too much?
No, that's great.
I'm not hearing
Keep going.
anything. So I'm gonna move on. Oh, so hey, it's demo time. Now I need to figure out how to switch my screen. Gosh darn it. Well, I've got it up here. So I've got Kim is built. I've got a couple of alpha releases. You can see I've targeted Mac, AMD 64 and ARM 64, Linux, same for both, and there's even a Windows executable. So if you want to try it out, and you've got a K3S installation somewhere that you can point it at, so long as it's not running in a container, it should just work. Can I? There we go.
You want to switch your screen, if you go to the little go to webinar
Can I pick
panel
which
up in the
desktop?
top where there's like a big play button. Yeah, you should be able to click where it says show, and there's a drop down that'll let you pick a different screen.
Ah, there we go.
Nice.
Cool.
We see your terminal now.
All right. Thank you. Something I was hoping to practice beforehand, but we forgot to do that. So demo time, yeah. So I've already got Kim installed here, and it's in my user local bin, and I happen to have also done the let's see. Actually, let's move over. Hold on. Let's move over to the single node installation first because it's simpler, right? So same deal. Like I've got Kim, it's built locally. It matches, oops, of course, that's not the command. It matches essentially what's been shipped and pushed out to the GitHub release. And I've also got the node, which you can see up there, right? I've got a recent K3S 120 installation, which, by the way, I'll be cutting a release either today or tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm the release captain for that later today, so that's fun. And let's get this thing up and running, right? So we want to do Kim. Well, since we've already got a single node, we want to be able to just say, you know what? Once you download and install Kim, you should be able to immediately start doing stuff. So for you, a Kim build, it's going to say, oh, hey, you know what? I don't have an installation here. I'm going to automatically attempt to do that for you. And so it says, okay, it's adding the role to the node, to the Big Nook node, and it's setting up the namespace, setting up the TLS secrets, because all communication between Containerd and BuildKit via Kim is secured via MTLS. And then it set it up and ran it, and then now look, we're into the familiar BuildKit style output that you would expect if you run a build command. And so it's going through and it's building, and it's not going to really do anything interesting because I didn't give it a tag. All it's doing is warming the build cache, right? But this demonstrates I can just download Kim and immediately start running it, and provided I've met some basic assumptions, which is I've got a single node K3S cluster, it's going to install itself and start running without any intervention from you as the operator user. So that's that running on a single node system, recent K3S. I've also got, now this tab is, you can see I did a uname at the top. This tab is running Kim on my Mac, installed user local bin, and I'm pointing at a 3-node HA K3OS cluster, which is 3 small nooks sitting underneath my laptop at the moment. And so let's just try a similar deal, right? Let's try, well, instead of Kim, let's do, so let me do this. So the Kim, the CLI, right? Like, it's in your Kubernetes building your images. Well, it's got a very sort of Docker-like organization to it, but we've got the concept of a builder, because Kim does need to install itself. And so the idea is that the builder command would let you install and uninstall things. And right now, uninstall just deletes the namespace that it sets up, and so all the resources get deleted out of it. It will look like it's hanging, but it actually does something. We're not going to really demonstrate that today. But if I do a Kim builder install, but instead I do a cube, it's going to bark at me because it's got, hey, you've got too many nodes. What you should do is give it a selector to tell it to bind to the one node. So, oops, of course, typing is tough when you're doing it live. So what I'm doing is I'm essentially giving a node selector that tells the installation process to only worry about that one node. And then on subsequent runs, I don't care, because it's going to look up and see, oh, I've got my builder node. My builder node is this. And it does that via service endpoint inspection. And I can show you what that looks like. So similar sort of output that we saw before. We don't see the warning message because it's not doing it automatically. But we do see these outputs. And so after about 15 to 30 seconds roughly, it should be installed. Okay, so if we do a get node on there, for whatever reason the Mac talking to the Nooks is slow. I don't know, there's a DNS lookup problem or something. We can see that it's marked. I hope these fonts are big, by the way, because I did expand the screen. Please let me know if things are looking a little bit too small. I can always make it bigger. But this seems about right sized for showing all the information I want to show. You can see that the Nook 1 node, as we specified via selector, has been marked as a builder. And so let's do a let's do that. All right, so we've got the nodes and we've got the builder service that was set up for us. It's node port, but it's using host net, so it's not really a true node port, but and it's 1234 for build kit, which is the standard port, and 1233 for the Kim agent, which is essentially like a sidecar that I mentioned that sits alongside build kit and sits on top of container D. And the pod running it is here. And let's do a describe. Boop, boop. Okay, so there's a lot. Well, you can see there's a lot of stuff going on here. I'm not doing any. I'm not as of yet currently doing an introspection pass of the system to see should I be bind mounting Etsy SCSSL or Etsy PKI. I'm just aggressively going for both. Because I don't care. The Go-based runtime is going to look in both, and the first hits that it finds for a system level a trust store, it's going to be using that. So right now there are some side effects of installing Kim, which is you have these kind of directories show up. But as you can see, I've got pretty much a standard. Well, let's see, that's Kim. Pretty much a standard build kit installation here. These are the certs and whatnot that we set up at installation time. Kim, the client itself, completely owns those resources, but they are shoved into Kubernetes as secrets. And so the Kim client, when it starts up, will pull those and download those. And you can also refresh them by doing a force install, and it recreates everything. So standard build kit installation running as an image with its bind mounts that it wants. Okay. And now we've got the Kim agent installation. And I have it running as debug because it makes it nice to see when problems happen, but a very similar configuration for the TLS certs. But I'm also telling it to, this is where you need to talk to your containerd socket. Excuse me. And I'm also telling it how to talk to build kit. Well, I'm also telling it when it goes to install build kit, this is the port it should be using. And this is the port it should be using for itself. So maybe that's a little bit too much detail in the pods, but that's really all that the install did, right? Is it installed a daemon set that will only install to builders based on, well, let's look at the, based on this, well, I don't know. It will only install to nodes that have the builder role. So you can see maybe that we've set ourselves up for the possibility of multiple builders in a cluster. And that is definitely true. There's still a couple of hiccups that has to do with negotiating which backend to talk to. And so right now, we're trying to be multi-builder ready, but right now most assumptions are still hinging off, or most use cases are still hinging off the assumption that there's only one builder role. All right, so we've got it installed. So let's see. Okay, those are the images on my Nook 1. Oh, and I've got some images that I forgot to get rid of. So let's, and I don't know why that one's showing up twice, which was a fun little thing to see. All right, so that was some of my build stuff. I got rid of the evidence of practice earlier today. So we've got, we've got we just demoed the RM command. We just, we showed the build command earlier. What if we do a tag operation, right? So let's tag Rancher Kim as, let's see, let's have a little fun with it. And it's, gosh, I'm all about the cut and paste while I'm in a demo here. And it also helps introduce slowness into my process, which is good. So let's call it Kim Possible. Right, so that image should now show up as, yeah, there we go. We've got Dwemer Kim Possible, and it's got the same image ID. Of course it does. Although I think it should have, no, it's even got the same manifest ID as well. that'll be different when we recompile it and retag it. So, you know, we've demoed sort of the basic commands, and that's cool and all that, but let's get to the meat of it, which is actually building. I want to build images. And so just for some added, what I like to say as mind-bending demo goodness, let's use Kim to build Kim and reinstall itself with itself. So, and this is where things sometimes go sideways, so I'm going to try and slow down and make sure that I type all of my commands correctly, because I've goofed it before. But so a couple things. First thing is that when we talk about the pieces that Kim is building when it builds itself, there are two parts to it. There's the single executable, which is the server for running the agent as well as for running the client, kind of like old style Docker, right? The daemon and the client CLI were all bundled into one. And that's the case here. Now, the server capabilities are stripped out of builds for Mac and Windows, but that's taken care of via build tags, based on the OS. So we just need to rebuild Kim, and I've actually made a little bit of a difference here. Made a small change to Kim to be able to, do this really cool trick that I'm going to show you. But so let's use Kim to build Kim. So I want to do this for reasons that may be a little bit more obvious later. So we're going to do build, and we're going to do a couple things. We're going to pass in some build args, like in the way that you may expect to do with a normal Docker build file, and I will show the Docker file. Well, you can see parts of it right here, right? So I'm going to be overriding my org to be Dwemer instead of Rancher, because we're going to push the image out eventually. And I'm not going to override the package, but I am going to override the tag, which normally the build time takes care of for you with the make file, but because we're doing it directly against the Docker file, I need to specify that. So let's do v0.0.0. Keep the Kim possible references going. We have to say tag. Tag equals that. And so let's, build args. Of my typing during a demo. So while that's running, any other questions out there, Adrian, Hussein?
Hundreds.
Hundreds.
Not really. There's like 10. So let's just go through them from the top.
Once more, man.
Shashidar would like to know if there's any authentication functionality built into Kim. There's actually a second part of that question, but let's go with that. Does it have any authentication functionality, or can anybody build against it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Authentication is mediated by your kubeconfig, right? So if you've got a kubeconfig with essentially full access to your node, I haven't enumerated what the actual permissions are needed. But if you've got an admin level kubeconfig, then you can install Kim onto your node. And that's really what it comes down to. So provided that you've got the permissions to talk to the backend Kubernetes cluster, you've got the permissions to install and run Kim. If you do not have those permissions, maybe you have a kubeconfig for a service account or whatnot that doesn't have access to the kube image namespace. Well, in that case, you're not going to be able to run builds against the backend, because you're not going to be able to access the MTLS secrets that are needed to talk to the backends. And so in that way, we have secured the base installation.
Okay, so just working with standard Kubernetes RBAC and the namespace parameters.
Yep.
Cool. It's nice. Makes it nice and clean.
Yeah.
Thorsten would like to know, and Thorsten's not the only one who's asked this. It's come up a couple of times in other questions. People are wondering if it's possible, and if it's not possible, if it might be possible in the future to have Kim share a built image with other nodes in the cluster so that people wouldn't need to push it out to a registry and then bring it back down.
Right. That's something that I'm actually really interested in. And SUSE has Hack Week coming up next week, which I'm going to be working on essentially a CRD that makes images first-class items such that you can schedule them to nodes, which would take care of that. And maybe I'll also make builds like first-class things like jobs as opposed to ephemeral executions like they are right now. But so yeah, it's definitely something I'm thinking about because moving content around from container D to container D is something that is maybe painful is not the right word, but it's much slower than it needs to be, especially in like a homogeneous cluster or even a heterogeneous cluster, provided you've got manifested images.
Mm-hmm. Bill has his eye on security. He's been asking some really good questions about security. And the latest one, I asked him to qualify, and his answer is actually pretty good. Would it be possible for a malicious actor or somebody maybe by not intentionally but by mistake to build an image with a tag and a name that is already present on the cluster like maybe etcd or something like that, and end up actually overwriting an existing container image? And is there any way to prevent that?
Currently, there are no safeguards for something like that, right? This is very much a development first focused tool chain, but that is a really good question, and that does obviously bring up the security implications of if you've got access to the builder, you've got access to at the very least the entire node that the builder is installed on, right? You've got control over it. So I wanted to call that out explicitly, which means that you've got full control effectively over all of the content that's on the file system on that node. So yes, you could say that is currently a gap that needs to be addressed. There are no safeguards to prevent you from overwriting existing images. Which,
Okay.
if we make, that makes me think, if we make images first-class things, like, make custom resources, definitions for them, then you've got the ability to say, you know what, when I intake my images, when I actually, save the content with a particular tag, one of my checks is, does this potentially override basically, I should check an allow list or a deny list to see if I'm allowed to do that. And that would be a cool enhancement, I think. Really good question.
Yeah, it would be. Thank you, Bill. Let's see what else we've got going on. I'll give you a couple more, and then we can get back to your demo.
Yeah.
It looks like Shashidar had a question that coincided with something you were showing. I'm not sure what it was, but I'll read it and hopefully you can tie it back to something.
Okay.
Shashidar is asking, could you elaborate on IP mapping and IP assignment? Does that apply to something that you showed?
I think maybe when I did the service listing. Oh, come on, kubectl. Okay. So when we were looking at like the cluster IP or whatever, I'm assuming that's where that was coming from. So I'm not super like services in Kubernetes still like weird me out, and I mess up stuff. So if I misspeak, feel free to call me out on it. But the very simplest of services in a Kubernetes installation is a node port service. And if you pair a node port service that's also fronting for a pod with host IP networking, what you get is that port on that node is exposed for any external connector to any external dialer to connect to, right? And this is specifically what I needed because I want to be able to point my client at what are essentially the external IPs, right? And it was already a very privileged thing as it is, so it just made sense that those two things just sort of fell together, and I haven't thought any more about it. With regards to, can you repeat the question again? IP mapping and assignment?
An IP assignment. Yeah. Just answer it as
Yeah.
best you can, and if Shashadar still has a question, then Shashadar. If we don't answer it, just ask it differently, and we'll come back to it.
Well, and let me say it this way. Let's say that let's say that we made the ability to modify the service to run as a load balance service, right? But then you would also need some sort of ingress to intake that, right? I don't have that set up because I didn't want to add the extra layers. But you definitely could run your service as a load balance service. You could modify it because Kim, once it's installed, doesn't attempt to do anything unless you force install, which will overwrite, right? So you could modify the service after it's installed. That's assuming that we don't add in any functionality to customize the installation. So you could run it as a load balance service thing and then set up an ingress to intake from external IPs and route it to wherever the installation happens to be. That definitely could be done. But right now it's very much a node specific thing, right? So if you install it on a node, you're going to talk to it via that node's IP.
Okay, works for me.
Okay.
Last question before we get back to your demo is from Caleb, who asks, are there any plans to cover code to image with Kim, something like build packs?
Something like build packs, code to image. Oh, like the Heroku style way of pulling things off. Well, I mean, I think Kim is in the same way that Docker is ready to be part of a Git server-side hook that does a build on receipt of a new commit. So that's definitely
Yeah.
something that could be done. But so the answer is yes and no. Yes, in the same way that Docker is, because it's a Docker like drop-in, right? Provided you've got the runtime that the client can talk to. But no other special considerations beyond whatever's already out there for the Docker container image ecosystem.
Right. Okay. Why don't you go back to your demo and we'll just continue to collect questions for the next time you've got a moment.
Okay, so we did a basic build here. What did we do? We did a basic build, but we didn't save it, right? So if we do, right, we don't see anything new here. We've still got Rancher Kim. We've got our Dwemer Kim possible, but we don't have the v0.0 possible. But that's because that tag that tag showed up here in the make file. That's all that's there for, is so that when Kim reports itself, it'll tell you what version it thinks it is. And part of the reason for that is that also that version that Kim is built with, as well as the org that I passed, right? That tells it how to dereference the image that it needs to set up the Kim agent sidecar for BuildKit when it's installing itself. So we need to have that image actually show up. So, well, of course I didn't have a tag there, right? So let's do that. And so this is an unfortunate duplication. And again, the makefile takes care of this for you when you build Kim. But if you're doing anything like this where you need to inject the version, you need to make your tag flag match your actual tag that you're building with, right? So let's 0. So now that will just build super duper quickly, or at least it should, yeah, because the build cache is already there. And you see that it's exported the manifest and the config layer. Like this is your image ID, this is your manifest ID. And we've got a docker.io Dwemer Kim 0.0.0 possible with 1 S because I can't type. So let's do with 2 S's. Okay, so we've got the 2 Dwemer Kims. And this is a cool functionality, right? So if you deleted the image by digest, or image ID rather, you would see that both of those go away. But I just want to delete this by tag. So let's do image rm, and I want to do, this is kind of the reason I'm doing this is because this used to be a problem with the way CRI implements delete, when you delete an image by tag or by reference, it still wants to delete all of them. Whereas a more Docker-like functionality is to say, you know what, when I'm deleting by tag, I want you to untag it for me, please. Thank you. So that's what we're going to do here. We should see, yep, the other Kim possible is still there. So that's good. Okay. All right. First major hurdle overcome. And so that's cool. And like, I've got that image available, but how would what's the easiest way to get Kim to install that? I mean, I can edit my pod deployment in situ, right? Or in vivo rather, and have it bounce. I can edit the deployment. It'll say, okay, you know what, that pod configuration needs to go away. It'll delete it and start up a new one. But I'd much rather sort of do that because we're dogfooding Kim with Kim. I'd much rather do that with Kim and just have it do a forced reinstall. But I've got to have it reference that version. Well, the best way to do that is to get Kim to, well, so let's do two things. So there's this cool, very build kit-like, let me pull over a brief digression into, do I have it? Yeah, so Kim supports these output flags that BuildKit supports, right? So there's lots of different ways to get your content out of the image that you've built. You know, of course, you can, well, let's see. You can output it to a tarball, and that's a Docker style tarball or an OCI image style tarball. You can also, you know, dump it right into container D. Like this is equivalent to saying /tag and then, you know, specifying your username image, right? And so, okay, well, that if we've got that output ability, then I've got the ability to dump that content to disk. But first, let's export the image. So I'm going to do image equals, and this is another sort of BuildKit thing. It doesn't normalize, it doesn't familiarize the image name, so you need to give it the full repository path. So we're doing that now. So so that's cool. That'll tag it. But you know, I also want to push it. Push equals true. Oops, what did I do? Output requires, oh, I forgot to do type. I just output, there we go. Type equals image, and you can see that it, did it not? It's, oh my gosh. Type image name equals, there we go. So what the Kim client has done has invoked BuildKit to build the image, and also when it's done building it, push it to Docker Hub, right? So if I do if I just do a Docker pull, because I don't have Docker installed, and we can my Mac has some weird DNS slowness. So well, you can see I pushed it 2 hours ago because honestly, that's a copy of content that I pushed up earlier in the day as part of my practice. But so that's the image that I built, right? And you know, so by the way, let's do a, this is for future reference, so keep this in mind. Dive is a great tool for taking a look at images. People may use Scopio, but I think Dive predates it. Anyway, the image itself is from scratch, and all it is a statically compiled KIM in a bin directory, and that's it, right? And so if I want to build an image but get the content onto my local system, I just need to make sure that I can dump that bin directory somewhere. Well, take a look here. I've got a bin directory, so maybe I can just do that. So we take our build line, and instead of pushing this thing, we're going to say that the type is local, and the destination is the current directory, because I just want that bin, I want the contents of that bin directory copied to what I've got going on here. And so you can see it's copying files. What that's telling you is it's exfilling the image onto my local system, and it's going to dump it in the current directory. And so then if I look at bin, you can see that that's 8:24. That's 2 hours ago. That's when I built the thing originally. And so if I do a, oh, that's not working. Well, that's because I built it on a Linux system. It's an ELF executable. It's not a Mac. Well, guess what? We mentioned build args, and I mentioned my little. Oh, let's do my. So here's a hint. I can override my GoOS build arg. So, or as Rob Pike likes to call it, it's a goose. Darwin, oops, if I can spell. And that should now dump it. Locally, so if I do,
I'm unreasonably excited by this. This is amazing.
Right. I mean, so let me. I mean, to me, it's like it's background. It makes sense. It just works. But this is actually really cool. So let me just lay out what I'm actually doing here. I'm using a Mac native client to talk to Kubernetes, and because I have my build system set up in such a way, I can parameterize the build that I'm doing and dump the content of that build. I can parameterize it so that it targets Darwin. It's cross-compiling via Go toolchain magic on a Linux system, and then dumping the content onto my host, which I've parameterized specific to my client rather. Dumping the content on my client that I parameterized specific to my client. And so as you can see, I've got a fully functioning local. Oops. Right. So you can see the version is 0 to 0 to 0 possible. So that's telling us that it wants to, excuse me, it took the build args that we passed it, and now if we use this KIM to do an installation over the top of what we've already got, we should see that the pod has a different image. And so let me one more time inspect that pod. So I'm going to send cube image, just because we're going to be going back to this to showing that the image changed. Get pod minus o YAML. No, that didn't work. Oh, it was just slow. Okay. Oh my gosh, hate managed parameters. Okay, so the image is docker.io mobi. Oh, not that one. Rancher Kim, right? So that's what the pod, that's what the Kim agent container in the pod is currently running with. So we should see that change when we do an install. But instead of doing this, we're going to use our locally built Kim that we just dog fooded, right? So builder install, and it's going to complain unless you give it a force. So basically it just redoes everything. And this usually takes a little bit longer because it needs to get rid of the old daemon set, which decommissions the pod. It takes a few number of seconds longer. So typically the reinstall via the force takes more seconds, but in this case, I guess it didn't. So if we do a get pod and search for Kim, oh, okay, so we see right here that the image is the one that we built and pushed. And let's see if it is working. Look at that, amazing. So we just used Kim to rebuild Kim on a client system that is a different OS than the host system. But we're still able to make that work without doing anything other than using Kim and the go and make build tool chains, right? Like to me, that's really powerful. Like this shortens the distance between what it takes to make a quick change and get it in my system such that I can see it working. Right now, also the other thing is I didn't actually need to push the image because I had built it and tagged it and it already existed on the system. And so I didn't demonstrate that because I wanted to demonstrate pushing, but we, truth be told, I didn't actually even have to do that, which I think is another cool thing because again, shorten the distance between your current, n and n+1 iteration and seeing what your change looks like without the whole push, pull, export, save rigmarole. Any questions at this point?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to one of our field engineers who's posting snarky comments. He's quite funny. That's Jason. We have a question from Benjamin from earlier. Actually, hang on. Let me do a different question. Okay, we had a question from Vito. Vito says, is it possible when building an image to mount secrets that can be used at build time so that we don't have to use insecure build args like Docker's -- secret arg and then the corresponding mounting into the Docker file and so on and so forth? Do you have that hooked into Kubernetes?
A very good question. So hold on, secrets. Specifically, I don't have Kubernetes secrets per se, but the image build commit, Kim's image build subcommand supports BuildKit style secrets, whether it's secrets in a file or SSH agent forwarding, as you can see right here. It's been a while since I've tested that, but I do have fixtures in the project that show it working, that I run every time I do a build or every time I do a release. I run to make sure that those work. I'm sorry. I think I blanked on the last part of the question, but I heard Kubernetes secrets. Provided you've exported the secret locally. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Continue. No, continue. You're answering it.
Provided you've exported the secret locally, you can then inject it into your build. But that is a really good question and an enhancement that I would like to make, because ideally we'd like to shorten the distance and never, accidentally expose a secret on a client system if we don't have to. But right now, a Kubernetes secret is not directly supported.
I actually have a follow-up on that. So does Kim also utilizes the added commands to the Docker file, something like the mount type secret that BuildKit currently supports, so that you can mount secrets from AWS, for example?
Yeah. So the magic in those types of scenarios is built into BuildKit itself. And so the short answer is yes, Kim will support that, but that's because Kim is a direct BuildKit client when it's doing builds, right? That's all it's talking directly to the BuildKit instance. And so what I mean when I say that for those use cases, the magic is in BuildKit, it's also in the Docker file. It's encoded in the Docker file itself. via a special comment at the top, right? You've got a stanza like a pragma that says, you know what, use this other Docker file backend to process these things. And all of that build kit magic is fully supported. Happy to say.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, this is so cool. Vito also asks, how much does all of this use in terms of resources?
Good question, because you can, as you can imagine, doing some builds, you can possibly have an ever-growing file system. BuildKit has some tuning to do some garbage collection. I'm not sure how great it is, but let me just say, like the backend Nook that I've been running this on has its primary root file system on a Optane 16 gigabyte chip, right? So I'm running on a 16 gig root OS with all of my content stored on there, and I've yet to run into a problem yet. And I've done a fair number of Kim builds and other builds without it being an issue. What that does bring up is there's probably some tuning knobs that we want to put in there, whether via annotation on the deployment or some other thing. There's no accounting for that just yet, but it's definitely something that could be dealt with to leverage build kits built-in garbage collection and space reclamation, as well as a more active image management oriented solution for making sure via policy that you don't have any disk pressure on the system. That's pie in the sky. It doesn't exist yet, but it could.
Yeah, also as a
And
follow-up question, sorry, I got a couple of questions asking about the resource limits on the builder components that Kim deployed on Kubernetes. Are there any resource limits or resource quota for the pods that are being deployed or not?
No, not at the moment. As you can see, the thing is a 010 alpha 3. I haven't done any of that, smarter, more good citizen work yet, but it's something that needs to be done. So like right now, there's no resource limits at all. Your build could overtake a node as much as the container runtime would allow it to.
Got it.
Hang on,
Sharp
let me just answer that question. Yeah, so we had some questions come by earlier, way earlier in the demo. First of all, if you've joined us late, somebody said that they might have gotten an email with the wrong time. We apologize for that. That's probably because of the daylight savings switch in the US. Sorry.
Yeah.
But this is being recorded, so you will get a link within a day or so of where you can go and watch the video up on YouTube. We had some questions earlier though, where people are saying, your slides, and obviously you're building this on K3OS and you're doing it with K3S. Will this work with any Kubernetes cluster, or is it just K3S?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Let's see, builder. So what we've got here are some CLI options for the install, right? So by default, is it? Oh wait, I did Kim build install, not builder. We've got you've got a couple of things that you can change, right? And so by default, you can see it's binding to the containerd socket where K3S puts it. You should, in theory, be able to override this to just point it at the regular containerd, which is just run containerd.sock. And on standard installations, that should just work, provided containerd is running with the default root ephemeral state, which is under run containerd, I believe, as opposed to persistent state, which is under varlet, right? So that said, I have it on my list to make sure that this works under EKS and AKS and any other Kubernetes installation. But that would require something of an introspection pass during the install phase, and I haven't implemented that yet. But it is a goal, an explicit goal that has been laid out, that has been asked of me to make sure that it works on any Kubernetes cluster, provided it's running containerd.
Okay. Caleb
So
asks, this is the last
not
question
there
for
yet.
now, if you have
So
more demo
I want
stuff
to be
after this.
surprised.
Caleb asks if the primary use case is for developer workflow or if it also makes sense to use this in a CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah, so another thing, well, we'd like to see it working in CI/CD pipelines, obviously. It's a little bit more overhead on the back end, right? Because you've got to have a K3s installation as opposed to a Docker installation. But given that K3s or a single node kubelet running is a stand-in for Docker at this point, there's no reason why it couldn't be made to work on the back end. That was a long answer. A shorter answer is yes, it could be once we take care of some of the security concerns that have been brought up. But yeah, I would most definitely love to see it in a CI/CD context.
Nice. That's it for questions right now. If you want to keep going.
So honestly, like I was surprised that the dog fooding didn't have more hiccups, and so that was the meat of it. um, and so I was hoping for more questions to sort of push me in different directions. Like, does anyone want to see me do a particular thing, or let me actually just describe. One of the things that I was trying to solve recently was a completely unrelated issue. Trying to solve an SE Linux problem for images that have volumes defined in them, right? Like one of the sneaky things that Containerd CRI does for you is if you declare a volume on your container image, it creates that thing for you as a shadow volume that Kubernetes has no knowledge about, but it does exist. Turns out on SE Linux systems for Containerd 1.4 series and above, if there was any content in that volume, which by the way, for Rancher there was, it was copying them with the SE Linux context of the storage, right? Well, storage is write only as per SE Linux context labeling. And that was causing problems for Rancher when it expected to write to its runtime data storage volume. And so I had a fix that I thought worked, and it required a bunch of rebuilding of essentially Containerd. And I needed to test that in RKE2. And so the best way I found to do that in a one-liner was to tell Kim to build it and push the image such that I could then start up Containerd parameterized by that image, or I'm sorry, I could start up RKE2 parameterized by the runtime image, and I could immediately test that change that I had done to rebuild Containerd. So it was still a multi-step process, but it made it really easy to get quick feedback when I was working on rebuilds of Containerd locally. Sorry, that was kind of a long story, but
That's crazy.
To me, I found that really powerful.
That's crazy.
Like, Kim could do this for me. Like, great.
All right, so
And
Caleb has tossed a question out. Caleb has risen to your challenge and says, okay, I think this is actually really good. Can you cover, even at a high level, the steps that we're skipping or that a developer would be skipping by using Kim? So like compare and contrast. If you were a developer, you'd have to do all of these things, and by using Kim, it's shortened to these things or gives you more power or whatever. How would you answer that?
yeah, well, so I would say top level idea is you're working on an image, right? And you rebuild it, and you need to have your deployment test the thing. Well, you've built it in Docker. Your Docker is completely separate from your Containerd runtime, at least the content is. And so you've either got to Docker save and then pipe that into a CTR load or whatever it is, right? You basically got to do the export import thing. And whether that's doing it locally via piping or whether it's doing a Docker push and then having your restarting your deployment such that it will do a pull, right? Assuming that you've got a pull policy of always, then you've essentially got that piping plumbing locally, or at worst, you've got the network traversal out and back in for content that's effectively local already, right? And so those are the steps at minimum that you are avoiding when you build an image locally against the Containerd that your kubelet is running against, right? Like the content is there and immediately available, ready to be used. As we saw, we built the image and we could do an LS of it, and it was there, and it was there alongside all of the other images that are local to that node specifically for Kubernetes, right? Like it wasn't an image in a separate special space. It was an image co-located with the rest of the Kubernetes images. And to me, I think that's a really powerful demonstration of shortening that distance. Let's see. Those really are the steps that you're cutting out, is either the local import export, or I'm sorry, export import, or the push and pull. That's the main optimization that we're making here with Kim.
Okay, we got more questions coming in. Vita wants to know if it's possible to specify a toleration for a tainted node that you want to only use it as a builder. So not just a label, but can you also specify a toleration and then taint that node so it's exclusive to just that function?
I mean, that was something I was thinking about, and you definitely could. Right now, the default installation doesn't have any tolerations, but that can be an easy enhancement. Right.
All right.
So I mean, the tolerance. So when Kim installs itself, there is no toleration, but we could add that, and then there's a standard toleration that you would want to add. Say, you know what? It's a builder. I'm gonna, we could also taint the node as well as give it a role.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but
interesting. You could accomplish the same functionality if you labeled the node and then just tainted it so nothing else ran there. That would have the same function. It would only run
Right,
builder
so,
functions.
yeah, yeah. Well, sort of, yeah. So again, like we've given it the builder role, which is a label, right? So let me, I mean, so there's, I think there's still value in taint, like it covers some things that the label wouldn't necessarily catch. But we can see that the builder, right, node role builder is true right here, right, like that. So that's the thing that we actually we mutate that node when we install, right? That's where that role comes from, is from specifically this. My highlight's not as good as it should be. From this label, that's where that role comes from, right up here, right?
I just
So
realized what I said made no sense. I was totally wrong. I understand now. Thank you for being kind to me.
yeah, but you could taint that way as well, right? Which is, you know what, only run workloads on the builder that tolerate the builder being present. Yeah, you could definitely do that.
Right.
Currently not
that's
supported.
that has to be after installing the builder itself, right? So that you can actually install the builder and then taint it. Then you can't run any application furthermore on this node, right?
Yeah, you could do that today. But I would argue that if we're going to have a standard taint, we should build that into the install process such that, maybe it's a flag, also taint. And then it would go ahead and taint the node as well when it gives it the role. But currently that doesn't happen, but it could be easily done. Very small change.
My question here is, isn't that kind of defeat the purpose of using Kim on the node itself as a builder? You kind of need to run the application with these images that you are actually building on this node.
Yeah, right. Because again, we're not talking about necessarily, well, you can definitely run a builder in production, but you'd want to, take some extra effort to secure it, right? And so not running workloads that shouldn't be co-located with a builder, if that's an important consideration in production, well, maybe running a builder in production isn't right for you. Which gets to your point, Hussein, and gets to the thing that I want to reiterate, which is this is very much focusing on development workflow. And so, yes, you're going to need to be running your applications on the node that you've built them on, right? And so the taint is one more thing that you have to deal with. And so you probably wouldn't want to deal with that. Once we get images replicated out to other nodes participating in the cluster, like once we get the content moving around, then that would be less of a problem, I think. But also then the taint becomes less useful as well. So I appreciate the point. Yes. And excuse me one sec. Any other questions?
Yes. Mark wants to know where in the Rancher user Slack he can go to talk about Kim. There's not a specific channel for this. I don't know if there's enough activity to justify making a channel. What do you think? Should we make a channel, or is there a better place that he can go?
I think we should make a channel. I mean, it's like one of the things that we're doing is this is like this is an open source project that we want to push and land. And having a channel is like a must-have part of that, in my opinion. So I think we should create a channel. I can do that. I haven't done that yet.
I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
Just want to call it Kim?
Yeah.
Kim Builder? Just Kim?
Yeah, Kim is good.
Done.
Awesome. So the answer
There you
is
go.
yes, we do have a Slack channel.
Mark, there's a Slack channel. It's called Kim. You should join it.
I will go ahead and join
Bill
that
has come
myself.
back. Hey, Martin joined. Oh, we have Martin. Okay, we got people rolling in. Awesome. Thank you all. So Bill's back with another security question saying, will you be looking at tools like DND rootless for the build step and then push the resulting image to containerd with an exclusion list? I think Bill's all over security.
Is this our Bill? Or is this a
Bill
different
Wood.
Bill? Would I do Docker and Docker rootless style? Can you ask the question again?
Will you be looking at tools like DND rootless for the build step and then push the resulting image to containerd with an exclusion list?
Right, so that's getting back to that question. And so that is very much the kind of implementation I was thinking of when he asked the question about, overriding images. So yeah, that matches up. That's at least my first instinct. We also necessarily don't need to, or we don't necessarily need to bind to the containerd socket directly. It does make the development workflow simpler, and there's less eventual consistency in the mix, right? Like it's do a build and the thing's immediately available provided your build succeeded, right? Whereas doing a DND or basically building within a container, doing some sort of OCI runner or something like that would tend to have a little bit more of eventual consistency issues, and then you need to sort of check for the results. But that's definitely something I'm thinking about specifically in the context of multi-node, as well as how would I implement an exclusion list mechanism. So, I mean, it's a good idea and it matches my thinking, but I haven't, started work on that yet.
Okay. Caleb wants to know if you can show just a full end-to-end thing of actually building something and then pushing it out to a registry and then pulling that down and running it inside of a Kubernetes cluster.
Sure. Let's do this. I'm going to make a temp directory here. I'll make a dit type. Okay, so let's do a from Alpine 3.13 because I like Alpine, and then let's do a run. Very Dockerfile specific to this is very my formatting here. APK. What tool do we want to add? Let's add JQ. How about that for whatever reason? And that should be good enough. So if we do a Kim build, just want to make sure, just want to smoke the Docker file. Yep, okay, that worked. So let's call it Dwemer Alpine JQ. Let's do this 3.13-JQ. Yeah. So Kim builds. Right. And so now if we do a Kim push, it's going to use the other thing that Kim does when pushing and pulling, I forgot to mention this, is it uses local Docker credentials if they're available, right? And that also means if you've got Docker credential helpers installed, it leverages those as well. So if you had like an ECR helper or whatnot, it would, or an AKS helper installed, your credentials would be pushed through to the operation and talking to the registry. So this should push it to my, oops, we're using command, and that, there we go. So, oh no, gosh darn it. Trying to think, what did I
Live
break?
debugging.
What did I break or what did I forget? Let's do this. Go to my Linux host.
When in doubt, use Linux.
Well, it's like I've got different authentication regimes, right? So it's possible that my login is stale on the Mac and I don't want to do any of that live. And I do most of my development on my Linux machine, so I'm SSH'd into that here. So let's, oops. Uh-oh. Okay. This is so annoying because this worked and I just talked about it working. Can push. Yeah, okay, so we've built it and we pushed it. And now we want to see running that, right? So kubectl, what is it? Is it run?
I do kubectl. I hate running just pods. kubectl create, deploy.
Yeah, I mean, I can just, let's see, hold on. Kubectl run. Yeah, let's do run.
So just a name and then a dash image.
Yep. Alpine 3.13-JQ sh. Oh, I didn't do interactive. Oh.
Yeah, just tell it to like sleep 3600. I don't know. Does that work?
How do I kubectl delete? Testing my Kubernetes knowledge here. My kubectl. Oh, come on. Die already, you pod. Okay. And so.
Yeah, there we go.
Right. So we're running an Alpine image. Alpine by default doesn't have JQ installed, but JQ version is installed. So there we go. That's a demonstration. I mean,
There you go.
running via kubectl, to me, that's like the easiest, quick and dirty way. It's also a great demonstration of, oh, I need some sort of tooling and I need to bring it locally to examine what's going on in this pod, right? And maybe you end up running this thing, excuse me, as an ephemeral container in an existing pod to inspect some of what's going on, maybe on the file system or whatnot, because maybe your pod images are all from scratch, but you want to inspect what's going on, what it's laying down on volumes to see, what's going on. That's a
Right.
To me, this is a great entree into that kind of example.
Very nice. All right, we have no more questions. Is there anything else that you want to show or talk about? If not, we can wrap it up and be out of here in the next 3 minutes.
Yeah, one more thing. So more like talk about. I was trying to get at that when the credentials fail on my Mac. I'm not sure why that is. It's almost usually something that I didn't do on my Mac correctly. But one of the sort of sly features that's built into Kim here is that I said is that the credentials that you have on your client machine are pushed through when you're doing, or are basically piped through when you're doing registry interactions, right? Pushing and pulling. And so what that means is you may not have your host configured via the Containerd CRI configuration to authenticate against a private repository or a particular registry. But provided you've got credentials for that on your client, you can actually pull images from those sources and get them on your host without any extra intervention, if that makes sense, right? Like, provided your client is Docker logins set up for those hosts, Kim will take advantage of that information and ship that off per request for you. So it's kind of like a neat little sly feature where you can get content onto a host that maybe the host isn't set up for, but you don't have to do any extra work provided your client is set up for.
That's pretty cool. Anything else?
And that was the last thing I wanted to say.
Okay, still have no more questions. So let me go ahead and take the presentation back from you, and I'll just run a quick reminder of where people can find stuff. Thank you all. I'm gonna turn my little webcam back on here so that since I actually look at the camera when I'm talking to people. Hey, hi, it's me again. Thank you all for coming today. Remember that you can find answers to all of your questions in the Rancher user Slack. Thanks to all of you who have already joined the Kim channel that we just created. Come over there. Actually, I asked Bill to come and join because Bill was putting some other really interesting ideas into the questions panel. So Jacob, I asked him to come and join and actually start sharing those ideas with you. So that's slack.rancher.io. If you don't have an invitation yet, were you going to say something?
I was going to say I'll join the channel and take a look at suggestions and questions.
There is a GitHub repo, so submit issues there. If you take this for a drive and you run into anything, you think you can do where it could be better, where something didn't work, where you have an idea, open an issue, and that's the primary place to communicate with ideas. But also come and just talk to us in the channel. So yeah, ongoing learning stuff. Rancher YouTube channel. These are all links that are in the chat. So Rancher YouTube channel, Kubernetes masterclasses, ongoing training, YouTube, everything is out there for all of you, including the Rancher Academy at academy.rancher.com. So again, oh, Jason's asking for a Slack link. Again, the Slack link is right up there, slack.rancher.io. That's where you get your invitation. And of course, once you have an invitation, there's actually, you can see there, it says sign in. It'll take you to whatever the Slack URL is for it. And I don't think I have any other. Yeah, so yeah, Rancher Academy. Jason says thank you. Okay, that's it. So thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you in the Rancher user Slack. Take this for a drive. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Hussein. If you guys want to say any final parting goodbye words.
Awesome questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks again. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.